So Bishop Joe, tell me what your view is of the impact of the coronavirus on your faith community, your own personal faith, of course, both now, but also what lessons, what might happen in the future.
We had a peculiar time of 2 weeks when significant numbers of both ministers and members were struck by COVID-19. And so there was a period when people were in hospital, or they were at home and not well. And then we were praying hard and hoping, oh, please God, save them. And then there was a period of a few days when people just kept dying. And I must say, personally, it affected me. The high point of this was, and I'm talking about probably 10 people dying in the space of just a few days. And that's just the high point, because there's more than that. But Bishop T.A. McCullough, who is my spiritual father from I was in my teens, to this day I regard him as that. And he died in that. My good friend Fabian Anderson died. And my good friend Horatio Ferron died. My good friend Colleen Lang died. And then her mother died. Now, within my own church, which is a reflection of the Pentecostal community, is a wide variety of understandings of God. One of my favorite theologians say that we should embrace the God we find, not the God we wish, not the God we wish for. And somebody said to me just today that we just have to keep on praying and hope that God will step in and say enough. And the cynical side of Joe Aldred said, yes, well, he didn't step in during 300 years of the transatlantic slave trade. So I'm not quite sure what incentive you would have for stepping in now. So there's that bit of saying, where is God? Where is God?
And in that personal grief and the grief of your community and grappling with where is that personal God, does the sense of isolation make it even harder? Or do you feel in some strange way connected with fellow parishioners or members of the church? And as you say, I was at the church a few months ago, and the warmth and the sense of community that was there. Can that exist in this isolated world that we're presently in? Is it supporting you in your time of need?
For me personally, I think what it's done is it's probably solidified for me my sense of indifference toward communal worship, and my long-standing sense of wanting to understand God beyond the euphoria of what happens on a Sunday. And that may be an age thing too, as I've got older. Maybe when I was younger, I was down with the kids, But as I've got older, and as I reflected on my faith over the years through study and just personal reflection, I think I have tired somewhat of the overt optimism and exuberance and dependence on that corporate worship and what goes on there.
That exuberance that you mentioned seems to me very much part of the Pentecostal existence, the charismatic churches. And so to sort of give up on it or to minimize it is a big statement to make. And I just wonder whether this move into perhaps a more individual relationship with the Almighty, which is what I'm kind of hearing from you, is that something that actually will continue alongside this incredible warmth that those churches, your churches, provide?
Well, there's certainly been a cry in my own heart for a greater sense of balance, and the intolerance and impatience that I have is with the sense that I feared a day like today, where you don't have access to to that gathering and what that seemed to bring and the dependence on it that there seemed to exist. Will this aid that? I hope it will. I hope it will. You know, the Pentecostal church is one bit of a very big and broad church. And as I've worked, I mentioned earlier about my work in ecumenism. As I've worked in ecumenism over the last 20, nearly 25 years now, I think what it has taught me is that if you get too locked into your own denominational framework and just your bit of the church and don't have a sense of the wider church and the way in which the Christian faith leads to a God who is bigger than any one denomination, bigger than any worship together you might do on a Sunday, that unless you develop in that more rounded sense, then you're not really walking in the true tradition of the church. In the psalm, this sense of solitude, this sense of, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Well, Pentecostalism, I think, has inadvertently taken us away from that in one sense. And I can see why somebody like yourself coming into a service like you did at Aberdeen Street, you know, might think this is wonderful. But it reminds me of every time I go back to Jamaica and I go back to my little country home where there's no running water and there's, you know, it's very romantic. But if I lived there all the time, I think I'd want running water on the property and I'd want electricity and so forth. And I think there's a sense in which those of us who live in Pentecostalism, if we don't see it yet, I think this is a reminder for us that actually, if you put too much dependence on what goes on in the building, you may be, even in the times when you can meet, you may be restricting yourself to an understanding of God that is not as enriching as the one that can come when you have a balance between that crowd and isolation and independence.
Well, we're coming towards the end, but I just want to push you a little bit on this question of the insider-outsider, if you like. You know, I'm Jewish. Someone comes to a synagogue and sees things in a way that I feel that's not really what it means to me. And it's true of my Muslim and friends from other faith communities as well. But there's also something to learn from those outsiders, because they see things with eyes that you don't have because you no longer see the wood from the tree. My last question is, what do you think the outsider to the church, to your church in particular, can bring that can help the faithful in that church grapple with these big questions? And particularly, let's talk about the question of loss, because that's something that many of us, you are, and many of us will experience if they haven't yet.
What the outsider can bring, and I encourage outsiders who come to Pentecostal churches to bring that to the party, is less of the sort of exotic, less of a, I don't know, romantic, and actually to see it for what it is. A fantastic, uplifting experience, as it can be for many, but only part of what is needed to create a rounded spiritual person. I really want to capture what it is that David is talking about walking through the valley of the shadow and yet having a faith rooted in God. What is it about Jesus on the cross saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? What is it about that experience of loneliness, especially in times of loss? And I have to say, just finally, I have spoken to so many people during this last 3 weeks, since so many people have died. And I've given you just a flavor of it with talking about 10, it's way beyond that. And one example which I give you is one very recent one where the person had lost his wife in this to COVID-19, and is explaining to me the challenge of 2 children who belong to a bit of Christianity, a bit of Pentecostalism, which is beyond the Church of God prophecy, which virtually doesn't believe in death. You know, it's one of these brands of Pentecostalism that believes that, you know, sickness is a curse. It's a result of sin, and therefore shouldn't have any place in your life if God has taken over your life. And so they struggle every time you come to a situation like this, where somebody's mother is first knocked down by this thing, and then in spite of all the praying and the shouting and the speaking in tongues, and dies. So his struggle was trying to go forward with two children who are in that mindset, now having lost their mom, trying to make sense of that. And for him, trying to deal with the fact that he can't even now go to see his deceased wife and what that means. Now, I hope another COVID-19 doesn't come in a hurry, but I have to say that if God means anything to us, that God has got to be bigger than euphoria. God has got to be bigger than life itself, and that God has to be one that is with us in life and in death, and able to help us to translate how we move between those two things. So, you know, that is my kind of wish going forward, that my faith and the faith of many like me can help us to live in the present in a fantastic way, but also prepare us for the times in life which have tragedy written all over it, and yet see us come out the other end believing that there is a God that is with us in the calm times as in the difficult and challenging times.
Bishop Joe Aldred, thank you very much.
Thank you.